I stood on that stage, my name echoing through the speakers, waiting for the flash of a camera or a wave from the front row. But as I scanned the crowd, the 2 seats I had saved for my parents remained empty. My father wasn't there to see me graduate top of my class. My mother wasn't there to hug me. At that exact moment, they were 5 miles away, hosting a lavish party for my brother, because he had finally passed a remedial math test. I was the straight A student they didn't have to worry about, so they simply stopped noticing I existed. But they'll notice me today, because 10 years later I'm the only person standing between them and the street. How does a child become invisible in her own home? It doesn't happen all at once. It's a slow erosion of importance, a series of not nows, and your brother needs us more. By the time I was 18, I was a ghost haunting the hallways of a house that belonged to someone else. The night of my graduation, I walked home alone. The gold tassel on my mortarboard bounced against my cheek, a mocking reminder of an achievement that no one cared to witness. As I turned the corner to our street, I saw the house ablaze with lights. Music, thumping, happy music, spilled out of the open windows. For a split second, a foolish spark of hope ignited in my chest. Maybe they surprised me, I thought. Maybe the empty seats were part of a plan. But as I stepped through the front door, the smell of expensive ribeye steak and the sound of popping champagne corks told a different story. The living room was filled with balloons. A giant banner hung across the fireplace. "Congratulations, Leo. You did it." My brother Leo was slumped on the sofa, a smug grin on his face as my father poured him a glass of sparkling cider. To my boy, my father toasted, his voice booming with a pride I had never tasted. "A passing grade. I knew you had it in you, son. Hard work pays off. We're going to the dealership tomorrow to look at that car we talked about." I stood in the doorway, my diploma clutched in a shaking hand. The silence of my own entrance was deafening. I felt like a black and white photo in a Technicolor world. My voice was a whisper, but it cut through the laughter like a blade. I graduated as valedictorian today. The room went silent. The ice in the bucket rattled. My mother turned, her eyes blinking as if she were trying to remember who I was. There was no joy in her expression, only a flicker of annoyance. "Oh, Brina," she sighed, adjusting her pearls. "We told you we were busy with Leo's celebration. You're the smart one, you don't need the fuss. Why are you being so selfish on your brother's big day? You know how hard he struggled to pass that class." I looked at the congratulations banner. I looked at the steak on the plates. I looked at the diploma in my hand, 4 years of sleepless nights, of being the best, of hoping that maybe this trophy would be the one to make them look at me. But a passing grade from Leo was worth more than a lifetime of excellence from me. I didn't cry. The tears had dried up years ago, somewhere between the 3rd and 4th time they forgot my birthday. Instead, a cold, hard clarity settled over me. It was the kind of clarity that feels like ice water running through your veins. I walked over to the kitchen trash can. Slowly, deliberately, I took off my graduation cap and dropped it inside. The valedictorian cord followed. "You're right, Mom," I said, my voice eerily steady. "I don't need the fuss. And starting tomorrow, you won't have to worry about me being selfish ever again. Because I'm leaving. And I'm taking my future with me." My father let out a short, mocking laugh. He didn't even set down his glass. "Go then, Brina. Go play at being an adult. You'll be back in a week when you realize how expensive the real world is and that nobody out there cares about your GPA." I looked at him, really looked at him, for the last time as a daughter. I'd rather starve in a world that doesn't know me than stay in a house that refuses to see me. I walked up the stairs, packed a single suitcase with the few things I truly owned, and walked out the door. I didn't look back. I didn't wait for a goodbye. I had spent 18 years waiting. I was done. Before we see where Brina's journey takes her into the cold reality of the city, take a moment to subscribe to Moments and Meanings by Anne. We share these stories because every life has a lesson, and every heart deserves to be heard. Join our community and never miss a story of transformation. The first few months were a blur of neon lights and the smell of stale coffee. My father was right about one thing: the world was expensive. But he was wrong about the rest. I found a room in a boarding house that smelled like floor wax and old newspapers. I worked 3 jobs. I was a waitress by day, a telemarketer by evening, and I spent my nights cleaning offices in the very skyscrapers I dreamed of owning one day. I remember one night scrubbing the floor of a CEO's office on the 42nd floor. The city lights stretched out below me like a carpet of diamonds. I was exhausted, my hands were raw from chemicals, and I had exactly $4 in my bank account. But as I looked at my reflection in the dark glass of the window, I didn't see the invisible daughter anymore. I saw a woman who was building a foundation. Meanwhile, back in the house I left behind, the golden investment was starting to crumble. Every time I allowed myself to check social media, a habit I eventually had to quit for my own sanity, I saw the decline. Leo's new car was gone. My parents' smiles looked tighter, more forced. But I didn't reach out. I let the silence grow. I knew that one day, that silence would be loud enough to bring them to their knees. Little did I know, that day would come sooner than I thought, and it would start with a phone call I never expected to answer. The transition from a girl with a suitcase to a woman with a mission didn't happen overnight. It happened in the quiet hours of 4 o'clock a.m., when the rest of the world was dreaming. I lived on instant noodles and the adrenaline of spite. Every time my muscles ached or I felt the urge to call home just to hear my mother's voice, I remembered that trash can. I remembered the champagne toast for a passing grade. I didn't just work, I studied the people whose offices I cleaned. I read the memos left on their desks. I watched how they spoke, how they negotiated, and how they commanded a room. I was a ghost in their world, but ghosts see everything. 5 years in, I landed a junior role at a real estate investment firm. I wasn't the smartest person in the room. I was the hungriest. While my colleagues went to happy hours, I was analyzing market trends. By year 7, I was closing deals that made the partners lean back and take notice. I had changed. My hair was sharper, my suits were tailored, and the softness in my eyes had been replaced by a steel that only comes from surviving. I was no longer Brina, the invisible girl. I was Brina, the closer. But then, the strange discovery happened. It started with a routine background check on a distressed property portfolio my firm was looking to acquire. It was a collection of residential homes in my old neighborhood, the safe suburbs. As I scrolled through the addresses, my heart skipped a beat. 34 Oak Crest Drive, my childhood home. It was listed as in foreclosure. But that didn't make sense. My father was a senior manager at a logistics firm. He was the provider. He was the one who always bragged about his solid foundation. I did what I do best. I dug deeper. What I found wasn't just a financial struggle, it was a total collapse. My father hadn't been a manager for 3 years. He had been downsized, and instead of telling anyone, he had lived off credit cards and a second mortgage to maintain the illusion of their middle-class life. And why? To keep funding Leo. The golden child hadn't just failed a few classes. Leo had become a black hole for the family's future. There were failed startups, legal fees from a misunderstanding at a nightclub, and a luxury lifestyle he hadn't earned but felt entitled to. My parents had liquidated their retirement, their savings, and finally, the roof over their heads, all to keep Leo from feeling the shame of failure. They were protecting the son who was destroying them, while the daughter who could have saved them was someone they hadn't spoken to in nearly a decade. Rising suspicion began to gnaw at me. I wondered, did they even know where I was? Did they care? Or was I truly scrubbed from their memories like a stain on the carpet? I decided to do something risky. I didn't call them. I didn't send a letter. Instead, I sent a scout, a junior associate from my office, to inspect the property under the guise of the bank's foreclosure proceedings. When the associate returned, his report was chilling. "The house is a wreck, Brina," he told me, tossing a folder onto my mahogany desk. "The lawn is dead. The windows are cracked. But the weirdest part? There were 3 people inside. An older couple and a younger man. They were arguing so loudly I could hear them from the driveway. The kid was screaming about needing money for a new venture, and the mother was crying, telling him they had nothing left to give. My hands shook as I opened the folder. There was a photo of the front door. The paint was peeling. The welcome mat I had bought with my first babysitting paycheck was still there, faded and gray. I felt a surge of mini-revelations. I realized that my parents weren't just victims of Leo, they were co-conspirators in their own ruin. They had chosen this. They had chosen to drown with their favorite son, rather than swim with their invisible daughter. But then, a darker thought hit me. If the house went to auction, they would be on the street within 30 days. My father's pride would never let him ask for help. They would vanish into the system, and Leo would likely leave them the moment the money officially ran out. I sat in my high-back leather chair, looking out at the city skyline. I could let the bank take it. I could watch from afar as the house that ignored me was leveled to the ground. It would be poetic justice. I picked up my desk phone and dialed my lawyer. "I want to buy 34 Oak Crest Drive," I said, my voice cold. "I want the debt, the deed, and the title. I want it all. But listen carefully, I want the purchase to be made through a shell company. I don't want my name on a single piece of paper they see. Not yet." "Why the secrecy, Brina?" my lawyer asked. I looked at a framed photo on my desk, the only one I kept. It was a picture of me at 10 years old, standing off to the side at one of Leo's birthdays, barely in the frame. "Because," I whispered, "I want to see the look on their faces when they realize their ghost is the only thing keeping them alive." The plan was in motion. Within 2 weeks, I owned my parents' lives. I owned their debt. I owned their beds. I owned the very walls that had once made me feel like I didn't exist. I was sitting in my office when my assistant buzzed in. Brina? There's an elderly couple in the lobby. They don't have an appointment. They say they're looking for the CEO of Emerald Holdings. They look distressed. They're begging for 5 minutes to talk about an eviction notice." My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. Emerald Holdings was my shell company. They were here. They had come to the top floor of the tallest building in the city to beg a stranger for mercy. They had no idea that the stranger was the girl whose graduation they skipped. "Send them in," I said. I turned my chair around so my back was to the door. "And Sarah? Don't use my name. Just refer to me as the principal." The door creaked open. I heard the hesitant footsteps of 2 people who had lost everything. I heard my mother's ragged breath. I heard the familiar heavy shuffle of my father's shoes. "Please." My father's voice cracked, a sound I had never heard before. He was always so strong, so loud. Now, he sounded like paper being torn. "We know we're behind. We know the bank sold the debt to your firm. But, please. Our son. He's just about to get back on his feet. If you could just give us 6 more months." I didn't move. I wanted to hear it. I wanted to hear him advocate for Leo one last time, even at the edge of the abyss. "Your son," I said, my voice disguised by the high-back chair. "The one you lost the house for?" "He's a good boy," my mother chimed in, her voice trembling. "He just needs a chance. We can't be on the street. It would ruin his reputation." Reputation. Even now, that was the currency they valued. I slowly began to rotate the chair. "And what about your daughter's reputation?" I asked. The chair clicked into place. I faced them. My mother gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. My father's eyes went wide, his jaw dropping as he took in my designer suit, my diamond earrings, and the sheer power radiating from the desk he couldn't afford to buy. They didn't recognize me at first. Not really. They saw a powerful woman, a titan of industry. But then, my mother saw my eyes. "Brina?" she whispered. "No," I said, leaning forward and placing my hands on the desk. "Brina died in a trash can 10 years ago. I'm the principal of Emerald Holdings. And you're sitting in my office, begging for a house that I already own." The silence in my office wasn't empty. It was heavy, thick with 10 years of unsaid words, missed birthdays, and the cold reality of a power shift they never saw coming. My mother's hand was still pressed against her mouth, her fingers trembling against her pale lips. My father, the man who once towered over me with a booming voice and a dismissive wave, looked like a hollowed-out tree, gray, brittle, and ready to snap. "Brina?" My father whispered again, his voice cracking on the second syllable. He took a staggering step toward my desk, his eyes frantically scanning my face as if searching for the little girl who used to hide in the corners of the living room. Is it really you?" I didn't stand up. I didn't offer them a seat. I didn't even blink. I stayed perfectly still, framed by the floor-to-ceiling glass that showed the world I had conquered while they were busy losing theirs. "To you," I said, my voice as cold as the marble floor beneath us, "I am the principal of Emerald Holdings, the person who holds the deed to 34 Oak Crest Drive. The person who decides if you sleep in your beds tonight, or on a park bench. My mother let out a small, broken sob. She reached out to touch the edge of my mahogany desk, but pulled her hand back as if the wood were red hot. Brina, please. We didn't know. We thought you were doing fine. You never called. You never told us where you went. I felt a sharp, bitter laugh rise in my throat, but I suppressed it. You thought I was doing fine? Based on what? The graduation you didn't attend? The phone calls you never made? Or was it the fact that as long as I wasn't asking for money, I simply didn't exist in your world? We were busy, Brina. My father suddenly barked, a flash of his old, stubborn pride flickering in his tired eyes. Leo was in trouble. He had that legal mess, and then the business failed, and your mother's health. Leo is always in trouble, I interrupted, leaning forward until I was just inches from his face. And you have spent every waking moment of the last decade being his shield. But who was my shield? Who was there when I was sleeping on a floor in a boarding house with no heater in the middle of January? Who was there when I worked 3 jobs just to buy a pair of shoes that didn't have holes in them? I stood up slowly, the movement fluid and predatory. I walked around the desk, my heels clicking like a countdown. I remember the night I left, I said, pacing a small circle around them. I remember the smell of the steak you bought for Leo's passing grade. I remember the champagne. And I remember you, Dad, telling me I'd be back in a week because the world was too expensive for a girl like me. My father lowered his head, his shoulders slumped. He looked at his own shoes, scuffed, cheap loafers that were a far cry from the Italian leather he used to wear. I bought that house, Dad, I continued, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. I didn't buy it because I wanted to live there. I bought it because I wanted to see if the people who treated me like an expense would eventually become one themselves. And here you are. 2 people who sacrificed a daughter to save a son who doesn't even have the courage to show up here today. He doesn't know we're here. My mother cried out, her eyes red-rimmed. He's at home. He's depressed, Brina. He's struggling. He's your brother. He is a parasite. I snapped. And you are the hosts he has finally finished feeding on. Do you want to know why Emerald Holdings bought your debt? It wasn't an investment. It was a mercy killing. I wanted to see the exact moment the golden child turned into lead. I walked back to my chair and sat down, crossing my legs with a practiced elegance. Tell me, where is the car you bought him that night? Where is the business you took out a second mortgage to fund? Where is the golden investment now? My father let out a long, shuddering breath. He looked up at me, and for the first time I saw a flicker of genuine shame, not just for the money, but for the man he had become. Gone, he whispered. It's all gone, Brina. He says it wasn't his fault. The market changed. The partners betrayed him. He just needs one more chance. Just 50,000 more, and he says he can turn it all around. I stared at him in disbelief. Even now, even in the middle of a high-rise office owned by the daughter they neglected, facing homelessness, they were still talking about one more chance for Leo. He's 32 years old, I shouted, the professional mask finally cracking. And you are 70. You are here begging me for a house you lost because of him, and you still have his excuses in your mouth. Do you even hear yourselves? My mother fell to her knees then, right there in the middle of my office. It was a sight that should have made me feel powerful, but it only made me feel sick. Please, Brina, she wailed, her forehead almost touching the carpet. Don't throw us out. I know we weren't perfect. I know we focused on Leo. But he was so weak, and you were always so strong. We thought you could handle it. We thought you didn't need us. That sentence, "we thought you didn't need us," was the ultimate betrayal. It is the excuse every neglectful parent uses to justify their silence. They turn your strength into a weapon against you. They punish you for surviving while they reward the one who refuses to grow. So, because I was strong enough to survive your neglect, I deserved to be abandoned? I asked, my voice trembling with a decade's worth of repressed rage. Is that the lesson, Mom? That the rewarded child is the one who fails, and the punished child is the one who succeeds? I looked at them, 2 broken people who had gambled their lives on the wrong horse and were now asking the horse they let starve to carry them home. I have a proposal for you, I said, regaining my composure. And I want you to listen very carefully, because this is the only offer you will ever get. My father looked up, a spark of desperate hope in his eyes. "I will stop the eviction," I began. "I will pay off the remaining debt on the house. I will even set up a trust that covers the property taxes and your basic medical expenses for the rest of your lives." My mother started to thank me, her voice filled with relief, but I held up a hand to silence her. "There are conditions," I said. "Strict, unbreakable conditions. First, Leo is out. Tonight. He is not allowed to live in that house. He is not allowed to receive a single penny of the money I provide. If I find out he has even stepped foot on that property, the trust dissolves, the house is sold, and you are on the street within 24 hours. My lawyers will be monitoring the utility bills, the grocery receipts, and the security cameras I am installing tomorrow." My father's face went pale. "But he has nowhere to go, Brina. He'll be homeless. Then he can do what I did," I replied coldly. "He can find a boarding house. He can scrub floors. He can find out exactly how much the real world costs. Or he can fail. That is no longer my concern, and it can no longer be yours. Second," I continued, "you will never mention his name to me again. You will never call me for extra help for him. You will live in that house as guests of Emerald Holdings. You will be comfortable, you will be fed, and you will be safe. But you will also be alone. I will not be visiting. I will not be your daughter. I am simply your landlord." The room went cold. The mercy I was offering wasn't a reunion, it was a gilded cage. I was giving them back their home, but I was taking away their purpose, their obsession with Leo. "You're asking us to choose," my father whispered, "between our son and our home." "No," I corrected him. "I'm asking you to choose between the son who took everything from you, and the daughter you took everything from. You chose him for 18 years. Now, I'm giving you one chance to choose your own survival." I pulled a thick stack of legal documents from my drawer and slid them across the desk. "Sign these," I said, "or leave. The choice is yours. But decide now. My next meeting starts in 10 minutes, and I don't have any more time to waste on ghosts." Brina has laid down the ultimate ultimatum. But can a mother truly turn her back on her golden child, even to save herself? And what happens when Leo finds out his invisible sister is now his master? The air in the office grew colder as the realization of my terms sank in. My father stared at the pen as if it were a jagged blade. My mother looked at the legal documents, her eyes darting between the fine print and the door. They were trapped between the son they loved too much and the daughter they hadn't loved enough. As my parents sat there, trembling over the decision of their lives, I felt a strange vibration from my desk. It was my private investigator, Miller. I ignored the call, but he texted me immediately. "Brina, don't sign anything yet. I just found out where the last loan went. It wasn't a business venture. You need to see this." I looked at my parents. "Wait," I said, pulling the documents back just as my father reached for the pen. "Before we finalize your mercy, I think there's something else we need to discuss. Something Leo hasn't told you." My mother's head snapped up. "What are you talking about?" "Leo tells us everything. He's been so transparent about his struggles." "Transparent?" I pulled up the file Miller had just encrypted and sent to my screen. "Let's look at the transparency of your golden boy." I turned the monitor toward them. It showed a series of bank transfers from my father's liquidated 401k. But they weren't going to a tech startup or a consulting firm. They were going into a private account held in a name I recognized. "Elena." "Who is Elena?" I asked, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous rumble. My mother frowned. "Elena? That's his girlfriend. Or she was. He said she stole from him. He said she was the reason the first business went under. Is that so?" I clicked the next tab, because according to these records, Leo didn't lose that money to a thief. He gave it to her. He's been paying for a luxury condo in the city, 2 luxury SUVs, and a series of high-stakes gambling debts in her name to keep his own credit score from tanking further. The rising suspicion that had been a small flame in my gut turned into a forest fire. I saw my father's face turn a sickly shade of gray. He leaned in, squinting at the numbers. The dates matched perfectly with the nights he had sat at the kitchen table, weeping because he couldn't afford his heart medication. But he told us he was skipped on his rent, my father whispered. He said he was sleeping in his office to save money for our mortgage. He doesn't have an office, Dad, I said, the mini revelations hitting like hammer blows. He hasn't had an office in 2 years. He's been living in that condo with Elena, using your retirement money to buy her Cartier watches while you were eating canned soup and hiding from the repo man. The silence that followed was different this time. It wasn't the silence of neglect. It was the silence of a total soul-crushing betrayal. My mother reached out and touched the screen, her finger tracing the amount of the last transfer, the exact amount of her late sister's inheritance that she had lent Leo 6 months ago. He lied, she breathed. It wasn't a question. It was the sound of a heart finally breaking beyond repair. He watched us lose our home. He watched your father collapse from the stress. And he was buying jewelry? It gets worse, I said, clicking the final file. Leo didn't just lose the house. He sold the secondary interest in the property to a private lender 2 years ago. He forged your signatures, Dad. He didn't just fail you. He robbed you. The reason the bank moved so fast wasn't just the missed payments. It was the fraud. My father let out a sound that wasn't human, a guttural moan of agony. He slumped back into the chair, his hands covering his face. The man who had boasted about his golden investment finally realized he had been the victim of a decade-long con, orchestrated by the person he cherished most. He's your son, my mother whispered, though she seemed to be talking to herself now. How could he? We gave him everything. We gave him your college fund, Brina. We gave him your bedroom. We gave him... She stopped. She looked at me, her eyes finally seeing the woman across the desk not as a landlord but as the daughter who had been sacrificed for a monster. You knew, she said. I suspected, I replied. But I wanted you to choose. I wanted to see if, given the chance, you would still pick him over your own life. And you were going to, weren't you? Until you saw the receipts. The major twist wasn't that Leo was a failure. It was that he was a predator. And my parents had been the willing prey. I slid the papers back toward them. The terms were the same, but the weight was different. Now you know the truth. Leo isn't struggling. He is a thief who wears your son's face. So, the offer stands. Sign the papers. Agree to the eviction of the man who robbed you. Agree to live in my house under my rules. Or go back to that rotting house and wait for the police to come for the fraud he committed in your name. My father didn't hesitate this time. He grabbed the pen with a trembling hand. He didn't look at my mother for permission. He signed his name, the name Leo had forged, on the lines that would legally bar his son from ever touching his life again. When he finished, he pushed the papers toward my mother. She looked at them for a long time. Tears tracked through the heavy makeup on her face. What will happen to him? She asked, her voice barely audible. He will be served with a restraining order and an eviction notice tonight, I said. If he wants to fight the fraud charges, that's between him and the district attorney. I'm not filing them, yet. That's up to you. She signed. The deal was done. I was the owner of their lives, but as I watched them walk out of my office, smaller, older, and shattered, I didn't feel the revenge I thought I would. I felt a profound sense of mourning. I was mourning the parents I never had, and the brother I never really knew. The papers are signed, but the war is just beginning. How will Leo react when he finds his keys don't work? And will Brina finally find the meaning in her success? Or will the invisible daughter always be haunted by the ghosts of her past? That night, the rain lashed against the windows of 34 Oak Crest Drive. I sat in my car at the end of the driveway, the engine idling, watching the front door. I had sent the private security team ahead of me. The locks had been changed at 6 p.m. sharp. The electricity was now in my name. The golden child was about to find out that his gilded cage had been dismantled. A pair of bright headlights swung into the driveway. A sleek, silver SUV, bought with my mother's inheritance, screeched to a halt. Leo stepped out, looking every bit the high flyer he pretended to be. He was wearing a designer jacket, a phone pressed to his ear, laughing about some big play he was making. He reached the front door, fumbled with his keys, and froze. He tried again. And again. He began to kick the door, his face turning a dark, ugly red. Dad. Open the door. He screamed. What did you do to the lock? Mom. Open up. I opened my car door and stepped out into the rain, My heels clicked on the wet pavement, a sound he hadn't heard in a decade, but one he would never forget after tonight. "They aren't coming to the door, Leo," I said, my voice cutting through the storm. He spun around, shielding his eyes from the rain. "Who's there? What do you want?" As I walked into the light of the porch, his jaw dropped. The invisible daughter was standing in front of him, draped in a coat that cost more than his car, looking at him with eyes that held no mercy. "Brina?" he gasped, his bravado vanishing in an instant. "What the hell are you doing here? And why can't I get into my house?" "It's not your house, Leo," I said, stopping at the base of the steps. "It's mine. I bought the deed. I bought the debt. And an hour ago our parents signed a legal agreement that bars you from this property for life." He laughed, but it was a high, panicked sound. "You're lying. They love me. They'd never do that. They need me." "No," I replied, pulling a manila envelope from my bag and dropping it on the wet grass. "They needed a son. What they got was a thief." I showed them the transfers to Elena. "Leo." I showed them the forged signatures. I showed them the jewelry you bought while Dad was skipping his heart medication. The color drained from his face. He looked at the envelope as if it were a bomb. You bitch. You think you're so much better than us because you made some money? You were always the weird one. The one nobody wanted. You're just doing this because you're jealous." "Jealous of what?" I asked, stepping closer. "Jealous of a man who robs his own parents? Jealous of a 32-year-old who hides behind his mother's skirt? No, Leo. I'm not jealous. I'm the person who is finally holding you accountable. You have 10 minutes to get whatever is in your car and leave. If you're still here at 10:15, the police will be here to discuss the fraud charges." He lunged toward me, his hand raised, but my security detail stepped out from the shadows of the porch. Leo stopped dead. He looked at the house he had bled dry, and then he looked at me. For the first time in his life, he was truly alone. He scrambled back into his SUV and sped away, the tires spitting gravel. He didn't look back at the parents who had given him everything. He just ran. I walked up the steps and used my key to open the door. The house smelled of dust and old memories. My parents were sitting in the living room, huddled together on the sofa I had technically just purchased. The "Congratulations, Leo" banner was still hanging, though it was yellowed and peeling at the corners. I walked over to the fireplace, ripped the banner down and threw it into the cold hearth. "The house is yours," I said to them. "The bills are paid. The fridge is full. You have a roof, and you have your health." My mother looked up at me, her eyes filled with a desperate, pathetic hope. Will you stay for dinner, Brina? Just this, once?" I looked around the room. I saw the empty chair where I should have sat 10 years ago. I saw the hallway where I had stood, diploma in hand, feeling like a ghost. "No," I said softly. "I have a flight to catch. My life is elsewhere. But we're your family." My father choked out, his voice thick with a regret that came 10 years too late. "Blood makes you related," I said, repeating the words that had become my mantra. "But loyalty and respect make you a family. You gave those things to a son who didn't deserve them. And you denied them to a daughter who earned them. I am your savior because I am a professional. But I am not your daughter because you didn't want one." I walked to the door, but stopped with my hand on the handle. "I'll have my office send someone once a week to check on the house. If you need anything, call the number on the business card. But don't call me." I stepped out into the night. The rain had stopped, and the air was crisp and clean. As I drove away, I looked in the rearview mirror at the small glowing house on Oak Crest Drive. I had saved them. I had fulfilled the duty of a daughter they never valued. But as the city lights began to surround me, I realized the true resolution. The invisible daughter didn't need their eyes to see her anymore. She had built her own light. Success isn't about the money in the bank or the title on the door. It's about the strength to survive the people who were supposed to love you, and the grace to save them anyway, even if you never go back. The story of Brina is a difficult one. It's a story of how neglect can forge a weapon of pure steel, and how loyalty can sometimes be a trap. Brina chose to be a savior, but she also chose to be free. What would you have done? Would you have left your parents to the consequences of their own choices, Or would you have bought the house just to show them what they lost? Which moment shocked you most? Was it the empty chair at graduation, or the discovery that Leo had been robbing them all along? Let me know in the comments below. Your stories and your perspectives are what make this community so special. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to Moments and Meanings by Anne. We have many more journeys to take together, stories of betrayal, resilience, and the hidden truths that define our lives. Stay tuned for our next story, and remember, every moment has a meaning.